Why does the battle for Mosul matter to Turkey? The Turkish army appears determined to take part in the offensive against ISIL, but Iraq says Turkish troops would breach Iraqi sovereignty. Is Turkey complicating the battle plans? And what are Turkey's main objectives in Iraq? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine Dennis. Now, Iraq calls it an invasion. Turkey says it's insurance. Both are arguing over the presence of Turkish troops in Iraq. Now, the Iraqi army, along with Kurdish, Sunni Arab and Shia Muslim troops, began the fight to recapture Mosul on Monday. Iraqi commanders say they've already seen early success and secured several villages. The Turkish President, though, appears determined to be part of the battle. The Iraqi Prime Minister is against it. Recep Tayyip Erdogan says Iraq can't push ISIL out of Mosul without his help. Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi says he won't let Turkish forces take part. Now, President Erdogan insists Turkish troops are already there and will stay until Mosul is liberated.
At the moment, operations are continuing in Mosul. What are they saying? That Turkey will not enter Mosul. How will I not enter? We share a 350-kilometer border, and I am under threat at this border. We will be in the operation, and we will be at the table. It is out of the question that we are not involved.
Well, Turkish commanders are refusing to withdraw troops that are already in northern Iraq at the Bashika military base. They've been there for more than a year now, training Sunni Muslim and allied Kurdish Peshmerga troops to fight ISIL. President Erdogan wants them to fight in the battle for Mosul and says Turkey's involvement would help contain sectarian tensions in the city. The Iraqi Prime Minister, al-Abadi, says Turkish troops on Iraqi soil breaches its sovereignty. All right, let's bring in our guests now. In Istanbul, we have Mustafa Akyol. He's an opinion writer at the International New York Times. In Rome, we have Maria Fantappie. She's a senior Iraq analyst at the International Crisis Group. And Professor Robert Pape at the University of Chicago. Welcome to you all. Mustafa, can I start with you? Why is Turkey adamant that it plays a part in the battle for Mosul?
Well, the civil wars both in Syria and Iraq have deeply affected Turkey in the past 4 years. 3 million refugees have come to Turkey since the beginning, more from Syria but also from Iraq. And Turkey worries that if in Mosul the cleansing of ISIL in the city leads to a Shia vengeance, you can read that in the Turkish press that there are some worries about that. That can lead to more refugees from Mosul into Turkey because Mosul is predominantly Sunni, and if the Sunnis in Mosul are worried about some Shia militants, taking revenge of what happened at the hands of ISIL, these refugees can head to Turkey. So that is, I think, one argument, maybe the most reasonable argument.
Okay,
that Ankara makes,
okay,
saying that we
enough.
should have a say in Mosul.
Okay, and Maria, in Rome, what we've just heard sounds like a fairly reasonable request and expectation from Turkey. Why is Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi so adamant that Turkey not play a part in the liberation of Mosul?
Well, regardless of the reason that Turkey can give, it's also true that a Turkish involvement into this campaign will seriously lead the things to escalate in the city, in the sense that we are having a scenario where insofar only the Kurdish forces of Masoud Barzani, and on the other side you have the Iraqi armies involving into the campaign, but if you have regional actors involving into this campaign, then things can escalate. So
but there are already, sorry Maria, there are already other regional actors involved in this campaign. We know that there are Iranian-backed Shia militias taking part in this campaign.
But precisely the point is how to make this battle as much as Iraqi as possible, and how to neutralize and limit the role that regional actors can play. Then if one regional actor steps in, then all the other will follow. So what we don't want is to have Mosul becoming a regional hub of tension. This will not benefit Turkey and will not benefit anyone in the region, and will not benefit at the international community level. So I guess that here we have to strike a balance between what is best also for the general regional stability rather than like single country interest. And I think that the best that we can have is that this battle remain strictly an Iraqi battle, and with the contained role of regional actor.
OK, Robert, we're seeing a spat almost develop between the Turkish leader and the Iraqi leader, haven't we? With the Turkish leader using quite abrasive language.
A limited intervention by Turkey on the border between Turkey and Iraq to stabilize the border and to stabilize refugees is actually a good thing. A direct intervention by Turkey, however, into Mosul itself, a city of 1 million Arab Sunnis, would not just inflame tensions with Baghdad and not just inflame tensions with, say, Iran, but could greatly complicate the whole operation in Mosul itself. Turkey is widely viewed as an opponent here. ISIS has, for years, demonized Turkey. ISIS right now wants to raise manpower to help the fight and defend Mosul. What would help ISIS tremendously would be if Turkey would send troops directly into Mosul, or even on the outskirts of Mosul. So a direct, heavy intervention by Turkey is in nobody's interest. The limited intervention, this is going to create angst, it's going to create nervousness, Baghdad's going to complain, but at the end of the day, Turkey does have millions of refugees on its border and inside of its border, and it has very reasonable interests in sort of stabilizing the border. Beyond that, that's a different story and could truly upset this apple cart.
So, Mustafa, as always in this region, there's a very delicate balancing act to be maintained here. It seems as though there might be some agreement reached regarding the participation of Turkish fighter planes, but it's the issue of ground forces, isn't it, that seems to provoke so much controversy. Explain to us why Turkish troops are already in northern Iraq. They've been there for about a year or so. Why are they there?
Well, there are a very limited number of Turkish troops in Iraq, in the Bashika camp, as you mentioned. And they went to Iraq with the request and with the legal support of the Kurdistan regional government, led by Masoud Barzani. Because let's recall that Iraqi Kurdistan has become one of Turkey's best allies in the region in the past 5-6 years. And in that camp, Turkish military personnel have been educating, like training, both the Kurdish Peshmerga fighters and some Iraqi Sunni fighters. Now, will Turkey's entrance into the Mosul battle complicate the scene? Yes, that's one risk. But the other risk is that when we say this is an Iraqi matter, just saying something Iraqi doesn't clear out the fact that most of the people, most elements in the Iraqi army that are coming to Mosul from the south are Shia militants. And we should do everything in our hand to avoid a sectarian clash in Mosul. Will Turkish presence escalate that tension, or will it rather balance that? I think that needs to be really thought out. And at the end of the day, I think Turkey has interests in Mosul, very legitimate ones, as Dr. Pape also mentioned. And the point is here to create a dialogue between Baghdad and Ankara to have some Turkish involvement, a legitimate and balanced involvement. But unfortunately, the language on both capitals has been very defiant, and it turned into a war of words between Turkish President and Iraqi Prime Minister. And there is actually some reasonable dialogue going on today. A team of diplomats from Ankara went to Baghdad. Maybe some diplomats from Baghdad will come to Ankara later this week. So we need that. So I think instead of just having this chest beating and we have the right and we'll do it kind of approach, two capitals should come to an understanding, precisely because Baghdad is seen as a Shiite city right now. And Turkey happens to be a Sunni majority country, and maybe the the Sunnis in Mosul will have some trust for Turkey. That's the whole point of the Bashika camp and the Sunni Arab militants trained in the Bashika camp by Turkish troops.
And Maria, even if Ankara doesn't get the explicit permission, if you like, from Baghdad to take part in the battle for Mosul, there's some suggestion that President Erdogan will go ahead anyway, move into northern parts of Iraq and establish safe zones for the people who might be fleeing Mosul as a consequence of this battle.
Well, I mean, we have seen also, not only in the case of Iraq, but also in the case of Syria, that Turkey, I mean, has been in a way trying in a way to have a role in both sides of the front line. I think that the best solution ever would really be that one that in which both Baghdad and Ankara will find a compromise, and they will have some. Turkey will need to be reassured that it will have some economic role in the city, as it had also this economic role even in the past. Let's not forget that before ISIL came, Turkey economic activity in Mosul were very prominent. So, I mean, no one denies the fact that Turkey can have an economic role in the aftermath of the campaign, but indeed a direct intervention inside the city or having its own project of settling a safe zone, as you mentioned, I think that that will really, in a way, sparkle sensitivity and unleash a snowball effect which will not benefit anyone. Let's not forget also another main factor that Turkey, in a way, has to also take care of not making even worse the relationship with the United States. At this stage, the United States, I guess, they are much concerned about Turkey going ahead into this operation without them, I mean, without them having, let's say, without them having any say about that. And I guess that this would also, I mean, a further deterioration of US-Turkey relationship will not also benefit Turkey in general. So I guess that Turkey, beside its local ambitions, it also has to redimension it in some way, its own ambition, and see also what's its benefit for its own country.
And Robert, isn't this as much about Turkey having its eye on the prize, if you like, and wanting to maintain a certain amount of influence for post-conflict Mosul, as much as wanting to be part of this battle in order to prevent an influx of refugees?
Yes, at the macro level, Turkey and Iraq are major regional players in the Middle East and especially in the Persian Gulf area. And so what you're seeing is, as ISIS is being pushed out of the scene, you're getting political change in a key part of Iraq and also in Syria. And so it's natural that you're also seeing some balance of power politics. Power politics, pure and simple, with both the Iraqis and the Turks. But this is where the Americans can play a real role. The Americans can play a role in not just facilitating dialogue, but in actually helping the parties to come to see that deeper interventions, especially extreme interventions with ground forces, can greatly complicate and escalate this already tumultuous political situation around Mosul. And that's a role that the Americans can play even behind the scenes. So it doesn't have to be the case that there's this giant peace conference and bring everybody together and make the Turks and the Baghdad government shake hands in a photo op. What we really want is understanding that limited intervention is reasonable, extreme intervention is not, and is against everybody's interests. And this is really the role for Secretary Kerry.
And Mustafa, do you think Ankara is in a mood to accept limited intervention?
I think so. I mean, Ankara ultimately, at the end of the day, makes a lot of sometimes strong statements, but at the end of the day, makes the reasonable and the doable thing. That's my experience, I mean, in Turkish foreign policy in the recent years, in Syria as well. And actually, Dr. Pape's suggestion is pretty reasonable. Here, actually, Ankara should do something else, if you ask me, and that is to tone down the nationalist emotional narrative of 1920s, because there was at the end of World War I, Turks had declared certain borders. That's what we call Misak-ı Milli, the national oath, and that included Mosul. Today, in Turkish media, you can see those Turkish maps, Greater Turkey with Mosul included. That's actually not a real policy. That's just emotional talk. That's just, you know, the government and the pro-government media playing into the emotions of the more nationalist side of Turkish society. But that doesn't help. I think Ankara needs to put its thesis, its interests more clearly. And indeed, the US government would do a favor to all parties involved by reconciling those reasonable Turkish demands and concerns with the concerns of the Iraqi government, which are not irreconcilable indeed.
And Maria, Turkey has an almost schizophrenic approach to the Kurdish question, doesn't it? On the one hand, it would not countenance anything remotely resembling a Kurdish homeland with the Syrian Kurds and, of course, with Turkish domestic Kurds. But when it comes to Mr. Barzani and the Kurds of northern Iraq, they have a completely different relationship.
Yeah, actually, I mean, you're pointing out a very important issue that, I mean, what was instrumental for Turkey to have a presence in Bashika is exactly Masoud Barzani and his own party. Let's not forget that in this moment, the Masoud Barzani party, it's not only a strong ally of Turkey, but I would dare to say that it's even closer to Turkey than it is to the United States. So there is really a strong relationship, if not a dependency at the moment, which in a way, as you say, is kind of schizophrenic. But what I think it's also very important to point out is that Turkey interest to have also a share in this campaign also relates to the presence of another Kurdish party which is deployed in the other side of Mosul. It has its forces on the other side of Mosul, which is PKK-affiliated forces which are present in Sinjar. So also this, it can be another wild card to some extent. If these PKK-affiliated forces will participate in the campaign, then of course Turkey will react. So as the other speakers and participants pointed out, what is extremely important is that the US does not only play a role of military coordination, but also use some sort of political leverage to make all these players, both local players, Iraqi players, and also regional players such as Turkey, securing that they will not, that some of their interests, they will be in a way guaranteed, but even if their political project will not be fulfilled at the fullest, but at least they will have some guarantees. If the US will not play this role, I think that it will be very difficult not to have a scenario of snowball effect, as I previously mentioned.
And Robert, how
Excuse me, may I briefly intervene here?
Please do, please do.
Yes, sir. One thing, yeah, on that issue of Turkey being schizophrenic when it comes to Kurdish gains in Iraq and Syria, I think it is not that simple, because I think there's a difference between what kinds of Kurds are we talking about. In Syria, the Kurdish movement right now, the Kurdish militia, is dominated by the PYD, which is an extension of the PKK, a Marxist-Leninist Kurdish group that Turkey sees as enemy and which is bombing Turkish cities and fighting a war with Turkey. But when you come to Iraq, the Kurds in Iraq, the Iraqi Kurdistan region, that is dominated, led by Masoud Barzani, who's an ally of Turkey. So I think Turkey is not against Kurds or Kurdish gains per se. Turkey is against PKK gains, and PKK is a specific Kurdish party, not
But how does Ankara square the circle of the demands for more autonomy coming from Erbil and Mr. Barzani's regional government? And Turkey has in the past offered a certain amount of support for that idea. So how do they support autonomy for one group of Kurds in northern Iraq and not for others, most definitely not for any others?
Well, it's very simple, because Ankara considers one group of those Kurds terrorists, the other one not.
Let's hear from Robert. Robert.
Yes, this is a very common political problem, not just in the Middle East. We have various types of, in parts of movements. And the usual way we do this is with subtle diplomacy that happens over periods of years, not trying to settle all this at a single snapshot moment. If you force and try to force a bargain to solve all of these cross-cutting cleavages in a single week or two, you're likely just going to have more chaos and to have things collapse. However, if we look at this in a larger picture, you see Turkey's, one of the core problems Turkey has is all the instability that's been triggered south of its border since 2003. And you'll remember Turkey was opposed to the America's intervention in Iraq, and precisely because of the hornet's nest that was likely to unfold. Well, that's been going on now for almost 15 years. And so what we are seeing is what we need from the United States is not just short-term band-aid solutions. We do need those, to be absolutely clear. However, we need to think in a broader picture, which means we need to have Sunnis governing Sunnis in the Arab parts of Iraq. And if we don't have that, then we're very likely, just in a year or two or three, no matter how many band-aids we put on, to be right back in the soup. That's what happened, what we did not do from 2011 to 2014. We did not create real working institutions of Sunnis governing Sunnis in Iraq. And what that did is it led to ISIS very easily taking Mosul.
But what you're
so what we need to do is not just solve the immediate term, but...
Sorry, Robert, what you're describing sounds like a series of mini-statelets. And many people, of course, have predicted rather ominously that Iraq could break up into could become balkanized, should we say, into different sectarian regions. This is sounds like what you're describing.
It does move a bit in that direction, but it doesn't have to move into complete partition. What we have seen is that states can deal with a fair degree of autonomy, and they can allow local control over certain parts of their country without having the state or the state itself break into pieces. And that, I think, is what we should be looking for when I talk about Sunnis governing Sunnis in Iraq. It's about the local autonomy, what's happening at the municipal level. Think about the United States, where we have state governments that are really quite powerful compared to the central state. I'm not calling for exactly that solution here in Iraq, but at the same time, we're moving in the direction of real local autonomy.
All right.
And that is something that we really could stabilize the situation.
Can we hear from Maria? Maria, you're bursting to say something.
Yes, actually, I mean, I think that we are not anymore in a phase where we sit at the table and we draft what should be the local governance of Iraq. I mean, that was happening before. But now we are in a phase where actually the operation and anti-ISIL operation itself, in the way it is conducted, is already shaping the political balance at the local level and the institution and the institutional setting in these places. So it's so important at this moment. I mean, there is a political agreement on how Mosul or Nineveh province will look like at this moment. But the way that the operation will unfold, whether the Sunni local forces will be used to secure internally the city, and the role of the Peshmerga on the one hand, and the role of the Iraqi army, the role of the counterterrorism, all this will play a role in a way in structuring the security architecture of post-ISIL Mosul, and that will already by itself in a way set the premises on how will be the future of Nineveh and the future of Mosul itself. I don't think we are in a phase now where neither the Iraqi government it has set a plan for this. The Kurdistan government, it has its own plan, but I mean, each side basically has its own plan for Nineveh, but none of the sides agree exactly on one specific. And the United States, yet they don't want to involve so much in shaping the political structure of the post-ISIL. So I think we have to look very closely on how the operation will unfold, which security forces will operate and where, and that will be crucial to understand how will be also the political settlement in the post-ISIL.
Right, can I thank you all very much indeed. Mustafa Akyol, Maria Fantappie and Robert Pape, thank you very much. And as ever, thank you for watching. You can see the programme again anytime you like by going to the website aljazeera.com. If you want more discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And there's always the Twitter sphere, our handle @AJ Inside Story. But from me, Martine Dennis, and the whole team here in Doha, it's bye for now.